All right. Hello, class. So, welcome back. Sorry that I'm not here again today, but we do have some really good information to cover. So, starting off, talking about in 1941, Operation Barbarossa was launched by Hitler, which was the invasion of the Soviet Union, which is really the biggest mistake that Hitler makes in the war. He launches three different groups, one north to Leningrad, one through central uh, Soviet Union to Moscow, and one to the south to Stalingrad. And really, Stalingrad is one of the most important battles of the war because there are oil fields just to the east of Stalingrad that Hitler really wants to get his hands on. So there are 600,000 German troops that go into Stalingrad, and then winter hits, and they get surrounded by Soviet forces, and they're trapped inside the city. 595,000 of the men that went in die in the battle. All in all, 1.8 to 2 million people die in Stalingrad, which is the bloodiest battle in the history of warfare. Another one of the bloodiest battles in the history of warfare is Leningrad, just to the north, the siege of Leningrad, where over 1 million people die in that battle. So it's incredible the Soviet Union has so many costs, and the Soviet resist fiercely, and they retreat at the beginning of 1941 and through 1942 until they can eventually, put up lines to defend themselves against Nazi invasion. And as they retreat, it's a scorched earth campaign, meaning they're removing all of their factories, they're burning down farms, they're salting their own fields to prevent the Nazis from gaining any benefit from this territory. And the bulk of Hitler's army is used in this effort. 80% are used to try and defeat the Soviet Union. And it's really Stalingrad is the turning point on the Eastern Front. So I always like to ask this question. We always think America wins World War II because we're awesome. We're the USA. Did the Soviets, did the USSR really win World War II? They sacrificed significantly more men. They turned away Hitler trying to gain those oil fields. They fought extraordinarily bravely, even though we kind of forget about that because we always give ourselves credit for winning the war, when really without the Soviet Union, the war would have been extraordinarily difficult for the United States to win. Now, one thing that we agree on with our allies is a Europe first strategy. And one of the most confusing things for students to remember is that our Europe first strategy takes us to North Africa. The Axis had taken many North African countries like Tunisia and Algeria for natural resources in those territories. So there were Italian and there were German troops in North Africa, and we decided we're going to expel them from North Africa first. So the first battles that we fight in are battles like El Alamein and other North African battles in Tunisia to expel the Germans. And we are being outsmarted and outwitted at every turn by the German general Erwin the Desert Fox Rommel. So ultimately, Eisenhower is appointed as the supreme commander of all Allied forces. That means not just in charge of American troops, like John J. Pershing was the head of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I. He's going to command all Allied forces. So this is a huge honor for an American general to be rewarded. He's in charge of British forces. He's in charge of all Allied forces. And one of his top generals, a three-star general, is named George S. Patton. He's the head of the 3rd Infantry that takes the invasion into Italy and is a very, very charismatic and opinion leader. The other top brass in the military don't like him. One thing that students always point out, and I think it's kind of interesting, look at George Patton. Does he look like anybody in modern America? Some students say he looks like President Trump quite a bit, and I think he does kind of look like President Trump. So one thing the Allies also agree upon when we join the war is that there will only be unconditional surrenders. What that means is that when Italy, Japan, and Germany surrender, there will be no conditions whatsoever. There will be no, well, if Emperor Hirohito stays in power, we will surrender. There will be no, if Mussolini is able to stay in power, we will surrender. Or if Hitler stays in power, we will surrender. They have to completely and entirely surrender everything about their culture and their society and their military to the Allies, or else the war will continue to rage on. So we win in North Africa, especially the Italians suffer huge losses and defeats, and embarrassingly in North Africa, Rommel is not able to get the supplies he needs in North Africa from Germany in time to defend against the American and British forces, so they have to retreat. This gives the Allies time to launch an invasion into Europe, which Stalin desperately wants because he understands that we need to open up a second front to draw some of Hitler's forces away from the Soviet Union by 1943. So Allied forces have an amphibious landing of Sicily, which is this island right down here off of the northern coast of Tunisia and Algeria. And all in all, it's a 38-day campaign to take Sicily. And then we invade southern Italy and we take Rome by September 3rd, and Italy surrenders at that point. Now, Benito Mussolini is captured and rescued in a daring attempt, which is a whole different story, but he is put into a puppet state leader in northern Italy. And you have to understand, here's northern Italy. Well, where's Germany? It's just north of this. So if the Allies are able to invade through the Alps in northern Italy into Germany, there was a major concern that the Germans could be very vulnerable on their underbelly, on the southern part of their nation. So he forces Mussolini and Italian troops to kind of defend northern Italy and prevent an Allied invasion there. So just one or two more slides here. It's talking about bombing raids. So early on in the war, bombing raids were seen as a way to decimate enemy facilities, manufacturing bases, aircraft, etc. So there were a lot of bombing raids. I mean, we talked about the Blitz of Britain. Stalin is begging Americans to open a second front. And while we do in Italy, that doesn't really draw away the troops that he's hoping. So we begin huge bombing campaigns against Germany. We're able to fly over German cities and bomb bridges, bomb cities, bomb all over the place in Germany. And it's very risky to do bombing raids because there's such heavy anti-aircraft fire when they do launch an attack. So it's very risky to do these types of attacks, but we still launch them regularly. So the debate starts becoming between strategic and saturation bombing. Strategic bombing is aiming for a specific target, whether it's a political target, a military target, an economic target, and you're trying to hit that very specific target in your bombing rate. As the war progresses, saturation or carpet bombing, as it's referred to sometimes, gets used more frequently, meaning we're just trying to impose maximum damage. And there's a lot of arguments against saturation bombing as a humanitarian issue because you're killing children, you're bombing schools, you're bombing innocent people that are civilians in those countries and killing them because the war is going on. And it kind of breaches that concept of, in warfare, soldiers are at risk, but civilians really should be largely left alone, and it's not their fault they're caught on this side of the war. Saturation bombing really violates that concept. For the last slide, the Tuskegee Airmen. These are black pilots. One area where segregation was kind of disregarded in the Army was in the Army Air Corps because we needed pilots. We were producing almost 3,000 planes a year by the end of the war, but we didn't have 3,000 men trained to fly these planes. So that's why women were able to fly transport aircraft, and blacks were able to be fighter pilots in Europe. So the Tuskegee Airmen were trained at the Tuskegee Institute, which, if you remember, Booker T. Washington begins, and they fly over 1,500 missions over enemy territory and did not lose a single bomber. One of the highest success rates in the entire military. So proving that one of the most dangerous and difficult and skillful jobs was being a pilot that most white men couldn't do. And the Tuskegee Airmen are a symbol for the black community in the United States of really successful African Americans fighting in the war, and that they could fight just as bravely and intensely. And, we should be proud of their service, just like we would be any white squadron. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday.